We're very efficient. We're already on stage.
I know.
So welcome. Congratulations on your new book, published just last month.
Thank you.
Cultures of Growth. It's terrific, from Simon & Schuster. I wanted to just start with, we're going to talk about the book and your ideas, but I had an experience the other day that kind of connected with this. I found myself on a Saturday morning in the garment district of New York with my wife, who was wanting to make a dress from scratch and was looking for fabric. And I said, as we were pulling bolts of fabric, I said, I don't think I'm qualified to be here. I'm not sure why I'm on this trip. And she said, well, I know why. And she said, you have a growth mindset. And I thought, okay, exactly. This is great. I'd been talking about your book. So
nice.
That's the setup. Anyhow, could we start with a definition of a fixed mindset, which you also call a culture of genius? That's on the one hand, and a growth mindset, which is different. And it's like, and you said it's a continuum. It's not just either or.
That's right. That's right. Well, can I see a show of hands of the folks here? How many people have heard of Carol Dweck's fixed mindset, growth mindset? Okay, a good number of people, but not everyone. So the idea behind the fixed mindset and about 25 years of research on this idea has really thought about it as a characteristic in our head. What's your mindset? How does it affect you? What's my mindset? How does it affect me? And the new part here that we're really focused on is thinking about mindset outside of the head, looking at how our interactions with each other, the cultures that we're a part of, our family dynamics, our team dynamics, our organizational dynamics, create a culture that has as its center this culture of genius idea, the fixed mindset. You either have it or you don't. You're smart or you're not. I'm a math person or I'm creative, right? Mm-hmm. These ideas, and when we build a whole culture around this, it actually brings out the fixed mindset in many of us, and that has consequences, as we'll talk about. On the other hand, there is the culture of growth. And that has at its center not this fixed mindset idea, but the growth mindset idea that we all have potential within us that we can grow and develop and nurture over time with the right support, seeking help when we are stuck, and mentoring along the way. And so what does it look like when we take mindset outside the mind and actually look at how these interpersonal dynamics, these group dynamics actually shape the mindset culture in our teams, in our organizations, in our families, in every relationship that we have? Mm-hmm.
Well, you exhibited some of that at a pivotal moment. You walked into Carol's office. You were a graduate student at Stanford, and you said, I have a new idea. And could you set that scene just a little bit? Because this was like, sometimes these things come from a conversation.
That's right. And how did Carol respond from her fixed to her growth mindset is the question.
Yeah.
So I was in graduate school, and at Stanford, what we do is at the end of every year, every Ph.D. student has to give a talk about their whole research for the last year. And so I was at a seminar like this, and I think we've all been at this seminar, you can tell me. I was sitting there supporting a friend of mine who was presenting, and he's giving his talk, his life's work, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, on the right-hand side, there's this professor who just blurts out, doesn't even raise his hand, well, clearly the fatal flaw is XYZ, and we're all like, what is this guy talking about? And then on the other side, another professor says, oh no, it's not XYZ, the fatal flaw is ABC. And they start fighting amongst each other to see who's the smartest in the room, who can take down this idea the fastest, right, with the most devastating comment. And I'm seeing what it's doing to my friend, right? He's starting to shut down. He can't answer the questions, can't participate in this, even though he's the expert in his own work. And the consequence of this was obviously devastating in the moment, but what was even more impactful, I think, is that he didn't even want to touch that project for another 3 or 4 months. And so this had long-term consequences because it was so painful to even revisit that project, given that situation, that culture of genius, that fixed mindset culture that was so on display there. And then several weeks later, I was in a different seminar, and the faculty, equally eminent faculty members, right, National Academies members, and they had a totally different way of approaching the student talks. Mm-hmm. Here, they were clearly finding what the problems were in the research, but instead of trying to figure out who's the smartest in the room, who can take down the idea with the most devastating, comment, they were really focused on how do we identify the flaws and the problems, and then competing against each other to see who can fix them in the most elegant way, with the most efficient approach. Oh, this person needs to include new measures, different population, think about it this way. And I saw what it did to the student, right? They were now able to respond to questions, participate in the brainstorming in the moment, and they were so motivated to go and work on the project immediately following because they had the strategies to do so based on the meeting. And so I took this idea. To me, it seemed like these are different environments, different ways of motivating people. And to me, they seem to have mindset at the center of them. And so I took this to Carol. She had just arrived from Columbia to Stanford. And I went down to her office and I knocked on her door and I said, Carol, I know that we've been focused on mindset really as this quality in our head. I think that's only half of it. I think that mindset actually exists in our interactions in the groups we're a part of and has a big impact on how we actually experience these environments. Has anyone ever thought of mindset at the group level, at the cultural level? And she said, no, Mayor, no one's ever done that, but we should do it together. And that was 15 years ago. And we have since looked at how this actually operates in mindset culture today.
Do you see when you're reading the news and looking at organizations, and some you might study in depth, like a fixed culture or a growth mindset culture in other things? I'm thinking of just like in the last few days, the University of South Carolina women's team. And by the way, the women's NCAA ratings were higher than the men's for the first time ever.
Yes.
But she took a team that was kind of like hodgepodge at first, and she let them make mistakes and and then grow and all that. Do you see that?
Absolutely. We cover a lot in the book. I cover a lot of examples from the sports world. Because we do see sort of teams and dynamics, very different methods of motivating a team, right? There's the culture of genius where we have some star players and the whole team is going to just get the ball to that star player. They'll figure it out, right? Or like we had in San Francisco, with the Super Bowl, a whole team of star players, right? So that maybe we don't even need the quarterback so much as like all of the other team members, right? That are just stars. And we're just going to kind of have everyone do their own thing well, forget about the dynamics so much. But then there's this other approach that's really the culture of growth approach, which is especially we see this in college where you can't necessarily choose your team in the same way that you can in the pros. And so you're kind of there with who you have. And so really taking this kind of build kind of approach, rather than a bot team approach, a build team approach. And how do you take individuals, find their strengths, find how they can cohere amongst each other? That's a real development approach, which is the culture of growth.
Now, one of the big topics in the news these days, and certainly at our conferences, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of backlash. There's also kind of a rethinking of structures. Is there a way where you can have a sort of more organic culture of inclusion through this growth idea?
Yeah. Well, to understand how the culture of growth actually supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to think about how the culture of genius excludes it. And so when we think about this culture of genius, you either have it or you don't, right? When we think of genius, and if you were to put genius into your Google search and look at the Google images, who do you think comes up? Let's hear some names. Yes, Einstein. You're going to get a whole page of Einsteins, absolutely. Anyone else? Steve Jobs. Elon Musk, perhaps, right? So you notice, what do these people all have in common? They come from the same, usually racial background, a particular gender, a particular class, a particular educational background, perhaps. And so this culture of genius actually holds this prototype of genius that is pretty narrow. And it actually, either on sometimes a subconscious level, but oftentimes more conscious, we actually look at how to match these prototypes. When we're looking to choose people to join the organization, recruit people, retain people, promote people in an organization, in a culture of genius, we subtly look at that culture prototype, that cultural prototype of genius, and we tend to match, which means that we are going to exclude the people that are not part of that image. Women, people of color, people with disabilities, people with any differences in terms of their background, LGBTQ plus individuals, right? And so the culture of genius kind of puts a straitjacket on people. And by the way, it's not so great for the geniuses themselves, right? It doesn't give them a whole lot of room to make mistakes, to learn, to grow and develop. Because if you lose your crown in the culture of genius, if you suddenly make a mistake, right? It's very black or white. You either have it or you don't. And so any mistake is extremely threatening there. In a culture of growth, it's much more diverse. Why? Because the key there is not, do you have this innate talent or ability, this stereotypical talent or ability? It's instead, how dedicated are you to learning, growth, and development? And that characteristic is much more sort of across different groups, kind of dispersed as a characteristic. And so anyone from any group can be committed to learning, growth, and development. It's about the distance traveled. And in fact, it might actually support individuals who came from structurally disadvantaged or otherwise excluded backgrounds because they have had to engage with a lot of challenges, overcome difficulties. And we know that the distance traveled is then going to predict the distance going forward. And so these individuals can oftentimes get a boost when thinking about who to recruit, who to retain when it comes to the culture of growth and those values relative to the culture of genius.
Well, no, you've studied some actual Fortune 500 companies that had this kind of a growth mindset, and including Microsoft. So what kind of differentiates them? How they intentionally go and we're going to go this direction versus maybe some others who don't?
Yeah. Well, Microsoft, everyone likes to use Microsoft because it's a successful example, but in this case, I think it's That's right. But in this case, I think it's really warranted because Satya Nadella, when he became CEO, he'd read Carol's book Mindset, and he said, we are going to declare Microsoft as the first growth-minded company in the world. And then Kathleen Hogan, the head of people and talent, had the task to actually make this real in the organization. And that was a challenge, right? Satya had described when he was asked when he first inherited Microsoft and came in and kind of did a little bit of a listening tour around the organization, he was asked, what's it like at Microsoft? And he pointed to a New Yorker cartoon where executives were around a conference boardroom table, and they all had guns pointing to each other. And he said, this is what it's like when it is at Microsoft, right? Everyone out for themselves, right? They had all kinds of practices and policies like stacked ranking that lined everyone up in the company. Bottom 20%, this is something, by Jack Welch at GE, sort of started a long time ago in the 80s, 70s, 80s. And, bottom 20% is fired and the rest can keep their job until the next performance review where we're going to do it all over again, right? What does this actually communicate around the fixed or the growth mindset? It makes everyone a competitor, right? Even the people on your own team, that 20% of you are not going to make it, no matter how well performing you are. And so he took this and he sort of said, okay, how are we going to make this real on the ground? Well, they started to look at their evaluation processes, their promotion processes. What were they counting? Yeah. They got rid of stack ranking. He started to use it in his strategy outside of HR, right? He started to look at across the organization 3 or 4 places where he thought he could make big investments in terms of resource allocation, knowing that not all of them are going to be successful, that some of them are going to fail. And he's willing to take that risk, knowing that's the case, in order to say, okay, we're going to give these teams the investment they need. We'll see how well they can produce, what they can actually achieve in terms of innovation and technology, and then we'll make a decision, in a year or two after we've made this investment. And from there came cloud computing, which actually put Microsoft back on the map and has allowed it to be as successful as it is. It's one of the most resilient tech stocks, right, that we know of in 2022. All the tech stocks took a big downturn, and Microsoft really remained steady and has since grown. So that's one example.
Pretty
there are many others.
Turnaround. Yeah, that was the evil empire at one point.
That's right. That's right.
Let's talk about the experience of mindset. Yeah. You've identified certain trigger points where it could go either way. You could go with a fixed response or a growth response. Things like high effort situations. Could you give us an example of one of those or how it might work?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about these 4 mindset triggers. These are 4 situations. They come from kind of the literature and also from experience working in companies and in schools, where we see over and over again, these are the 4 most common situations that either move us to our fixed or our growth mindset. right? The fixed and growth mindset exist on a continuum, as you said at the beginning. So does mindset culture. It exists on a continuum. Usually in a big company, there are pockets of a culture of growth and pockets of cultures of genius. And so the question is then, how do we identify those situations that are going to move us across the mindset continuum so that we can identify that? And if we're leaders, how do we actually identify the mindset triggers of those we lead? Because we are going to set up those situations for people, and you're going to see people moving between their fixed and their growth mindset, but you have power in that situation to do it. So the 4 situations are evaluative situations, high effort situations, critical feedback, and the success of others. So we can talk about one of them, maybe high effort situations. High effort situations are those when we are asking people to do something that's usually new to them, a stretch assignment, or you have to master something that a whole new product line or technology, right, that you didn't know anything about. And it's going to take a lot of time, energy, and resources to master that new situation. For a lot of people, this is their fixed mindset trigger, or at least one of them, because it moves them directly into that idea that if I have to try hard, it means that what? I don't naturally have it, right? I might not naturally be good at this. I might not naturally be talented, right? That fixed mindset idea. Oftentimes we have this belief in this negative correlation between ability and effort. If I have to try hard, it means I'm not so good. And so what we can do when we are setting up these situations for people is we can really ask them and talk to them about how they have responded to these challenges in the past. What are some strategies that can help them master this new idea? What kind of supports are you going to give them to really take on this high stakes or high effort kind of situation that you're asking them to do, this stretch assignment? And you can move them towards growth even in the moments that you're describing that to them, right? And so it's really useful for us to see this in ourselves. Oh yeah, that's my fixed mindset. Not to kind of push it away the way that a lot of people I think who read mindset kind of see fixed mindset as the bad thing, the thing we don't want. But the truth is that we all are going to have the fixed and the growth mindset. So identifying where it shows up and then how to manage it is so much more productive and more helpful to us than just trying to stuff it down. We know that that actually doesn't work for a lot of reasons from a psychological perspective.
So we shouldn't feel shame if we drift toward fixed once in a while. It's more comfortable.
The fixed mindset is so useful to be able to identify. I mean, every night loading the dishwasher, I have a fixed mindset. I know what's right and what's wrong. Right? And, how do I approach that? What do I say to my husband when I notice, things are in the wrong place again?
Yes, the stacking mindset. Yes. So the one other one you mentioned on it, maybe we can touch on it briefly because we only have a few minutes left, is the success of others. It can trigger envy, resentment, or fear, like, oh, they're getting better than me, or some other thing where you're, bigger than that. Right?
That's right.
How does that look?
So another mindset trigger is the success of others. This is especially important on small teams, right? When you have a small team, a lot of times, you're going to give an award. You might give particular praise. When we give praise, what do we usually say? Good job.
Yeah.
Well done. Way to go. That makes us feel really good, right? And I'm all about, I think we should help each other feel good. But it doesn't actually tell us what that person did well, what you actually want them to repeat or build on, and it certainly doesn't communicate that to the rest of the team. And so how do we actually praise people? So we don't push them to their fixed mindset where they think that success is zero sum. If she's so great, I'll never be like that. If he's so wonderful, right, how can I ever compete with that, right? Instead, how do we find inspiration in the success of others? A lot of times it's how we present that praise, how we actually describe the success and give our awards to people. What are we highlighting? Is it the distance traveled? Is it how they actually worked with the team in order to accomplish the task, right? And how do we make that explicit so that that person knows what to repeat and what to build on, but so does the rest of the team, right? Because then everyone has that learning opportunity, not just the individual who receives the award. Mm-hmm. And that's how we move from sort of jealousy and also learned helplessness around I'll never be able to do this to inspiration and actually action, so that we can have this kind of success shared across the whole team and organization.
Yeah, it's like putting a little flavor too into the recognition, so it's a model for other people. That's and right. Also people feel better when they think, you really recognize what they did.
That's right.
a growth, and there was a sort of epiphany you had that you give an example in your book of just having a moment of growth. You were walking down the street and you were inspired to do what? Yes.
Yeah. So I was on sabbatical. I was in San Francisco, and I was walking along the street, and I saw this incredible mural. And the mural itself said, "Become who you're meant to be," which is inspirational in and of itself. But really, what was what kind of really hit me was all of this beautiful hand lettering that it was this gorgeous like lettering and this art around the letters and stuff. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I could do that. I'm on sabbatical, I'm thinking big. It's also a time to kind of try some new things. But, you know, I grew up in a family where I was kind of the academic one, not surprising, right? Became a professor. Yeah. And my sister was the creative one, not me. And so I never really kind of took an opportunity to explore that side of myself or to think about it. And here I was on sabbatical. I thought, you know, I'm going to look up some YouTubes. I went way down the hand lettering YouTube hole, very deep. I got like special like calligraphy pens. I was watching videos. I got a couple of like exercise workbooks, and I just kind of took it on. And it wasn't for any reason. I didn't want to show anyone. I didn't want to prove to anyone. It was just for me. And that's kind of what the growth mindset can feel like, where you just sort of take something on, you get inspired by something. And how do we actually help support people to find those things that's really going to light them up, to give them the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to develop? Something that we know is that if we can do that in one part of our life, oftentimes it has a spillover effect to other parts of our life. And so finding those moments and those places where we can share those things that light us up and find ways to help support people to grow and develop those things, we're going to create an environment that everybody wants to be a part of.
Well, my moment was great. I picked out the fabric that got chosen in the garment district, and my wife is now cutting
and
out
she said,
into
okay, let's go for it.
So that was my big moment. Mary, congratulations.
Thank you.
Your book, Mary, will be, we have many copies to distribute, and Mary will be around for a limited time to sign them and say hello afterwards. And, our closing remarks will come from our title sponsor, Gary Benedict of Avenica. So welcome him to the stage, and thank you, Mary, and
thank you all.
Congratulations.